Hello and welcome everybody to an emergency podcast. We're joined by the man who broke the biggest story of the year, Broncos parting ways with their head coach, Kevin Walters, effective immediately. Peter Badel, can you tell us how this all unfolded?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jimmy. Look, yeah, it was quite a shock. I was blown away by this. I only spoke to Kevin Walters yesterday at 12 p.m. on Thursday, and we were planning a catch up. I was planning to do an interview with him for the weekend about the review, what happened, and looking forward. And Kevy, at that point, to my knowledge from our conversation and dialogue, I don't believe he had any knowledge of what was about to take place. We organised a meeting for a coffee next week to talk about the season. And then I received a tip off at about 6 p.m. last night that things might not be moving in that direction and Kevy might not be the coach next year. So things seemed to move pretty quickly yesterday. And that's led to the ructions that we now talk about. That Kevin Walters has been terminated and he won't be coaching the Broncos in 2025.
Yeah, I think everybody in the rugby league world is in a state of shock. You've got to, if you look at the timeline of events, obviously the season that was disappointing to say the least. The expectation that the Broncos would be challenging for a title again. Now, obviously, for a multitude of reasons, that didn't happen. We had Dave Donaghy sort of assure the public that Kevy would be in charge to start next season. Now, this end of season review that all clubs go through and have and conduct, it appears to be the result of that external review of the season.
Yeah, look, Jimmy, I have no doubt that this club-wide review has triggered the demise of Kevy because Dave Donaghy's a pretty straight shooter. And when I spoke to him about 2 or 3 weeks ago before the review took place, he was adamant that Kevin Walters would be coaching the Broncos in 2025. And look, from some of the information I've gleaned, Jimmy, the review was not favourable about Kevy. There was a lot of criticisms and a lot of concerns about the direction of the club, some of the cultural issues there, some of the standards at the club that had declined since their wonderful charge to the grand final the year before. So clearly there was some level of dissatisfaction, not just in minorities, but it must have been quite widespread for the Broncos to make such a quick and emphatic decision to tear up Kevy's contract with 2 years to run on his deal because the review was not kind, is my information.
And just on that review, everybody would have a voice, but certain voices carry more weight. The seniority of the players, the impact of the players. Now, like you say, that's not just one disgruntled individual. It appears as though, I'm thinking back to West Tigers, where the playing group, made a request to move on a coach. This obviously a decision not taken lightly, but we've got to assume that it's come down to 3 or 4 very influential marquee players at the Broncos.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jimmy. And look, you would have been part of these sorts of things yourself as the player you were. But look, I know that it was a holistic review. It was conducted by Michael Collins. He now works for Bond University, but he was a former New Zealand Rugby Union chief executive. He was with the Waikato Chiefs. He played for them as a player, so he had a pretty distinguished sporting career. So he presided over the review. He spoke to all 30 full-time players. He spoke to front office staff. He spoke to other people in and around the club. So he was quite voluminous in the amount of people he spoke to. But as you say, Jimmy, look, I know in the next few days players will come out and support Kevy naturally, but I can't help but get a feeling that someone with some gravitas, with some strength of voice in that organisation among the senior playing group or in the vast majority of the playing group must have been critical of what was going on at the club and maybe around Kevy's coaching and football structures, because as you said, Jimmy, you don't pull the trigger on a club legend unless certain key stakeholders are being listened to, and those stakeholders have to surely include the senior players.
Yeah, well, their voice would carry the most amount of influence and weight. You said there about culture and standards. Look, I'm trying to think. They made this time 12 months ago. They were playing in a grand final, preparing for a grand final. What has changed in terms of the culture and standards? Because that was an issue that issue wasn't really raised in the season. When we looked at the issues in the season, it seemed to be psychological. there was the lack, missing Flagler, missing Farnworth. It seemed to be a roster issue rather than a culture and standards issue.
Yeah, look, I have no doubt, Jimmy, that injuries were a major factor this season. I mean, you look at the amount of players they lost and the times they were lost for, and even the combinations they lacked. I mean, I think Renault and Ezra Mam only played a handful of games together in the halves, and they were the key to their grand final charge last year. But what I noticed, Jimmy, and look, I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. I mean, I don't work at the Broncos every day, but just things I observed as a journalist. For example, at the back end of the year, we would go into the dressing sheds as media to do our interviews with players. And I've never seen a shed like it in my 28-year career. You would have 400 people in there. It looked like a grand final dressing room that had just won the comp, or a state of origin winning dressing room. And they'd been beaten in some games. And yet there was hangers on. There were 8 family members per player. It was embarrassing. They were carrying on like they'd won the grand final and they've lost the game, and they got 2, 3, 400 people in a dressing shed. And I just found they're the types of standards that I'm talking about. I think there was a lack of strength in the football front office. I think the departure of Ben Ikin last year, I think the ructions of his departure is now being felt. It's easy to initially paper over the cracks of a key departure, but I think the absence of Ben Ikin is now being felt. And I think until they get a strong head of football to help the next coach, whoever that may be, then Brisbane will continue to struggle in pursuit of this elusive premiership. I think a strong front office, James, is what they need.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say there about the post game dressing room, and I know what that can be like. But also the things in and around training, this superstar fandom issue. I guess the Broncos with everything that they've earned, and they deserve that, especially last season, and that popularity. That's not really an issue for a coach to sort out. The people being in the dressing room, the coach is just. Ultimately that comes down to other staff that dictate who is in and out of the dressing room.
Yeah, absolutely, James. Look, as we've seen with the Melbourne Storm, who've been the best club of the past 2 decades in consistency, Craig Bellamy would even admit himself, the head coach, that he can't do this without the strength of Frank Panisi, their football manager, who's been there for 17 years. He drives standards. I remember going to a grand final media day where, for their team photo, a player had his socks down and Frank Panisi walked over and said, "Hey, pull your socks up, we're taking a photo." They're the types of 1%ers that we're talking about. It might sound infinitesimal and it might sound irrelevant, but those small 1%ers add up to cultural standards. And I think, guys, you're right, Jimmy, I think Brisbane may have had a bit of a hangover. I think some of their players thought they would be able to roll in this year and just continue on the surge that they had last year. But when injury struck, they lost a bit of momentum, and I don't know if maybe the standards of hunger were there, that perhaps were there 12 months ago. And now I hope there is that bounce back, Jimmy, because we want to see the Broncos great again.
Yeah, well, you speak of a bounce back. Obviously, attention now will turn to who will take over. They've not got very long. Ben Teo and Trent Barrett are coming in as assistants, but who is the front runner to take control of this job?
Well, I believe the front runner, Jimmy, is Michael Maguire, the New South Wales Origin coach. Now, that creates some implications in itself, because if he does get the job, I assume he'll have to resign as the Blues coach, which creates an issue for the Blues. But there will be some other names. I mean, Jason Demetriou coached the Broncos under Wayne Bennett as an assistant. Brad Arthur's an experienced coach, took Parramatta to the 22 grand final. They could be available. Ben and Shane Walker played for the club. They won a comp at Ipswich. So they'd be unlikely. They'd be outside chances. Trent Barrett, as you said, Jimmy, he's had head coaching experience. He could put his hand up. Josh Hannay missed out on the Parramatta job, and he's done a great job with the Maroons. He'd put his hand up. But I think personally that Michael Maguire will be the front runner, and I'd be stunned if he didn't get the job in the weeks coming forward.
Would Billy Slater entertain it, do you feel?
Yeah. Oh, look, great point. I mean, look, Billy's won 2 Origin Series, great player, legend of Queensland, legend of the Storm. I can't imagine a better option, really, Jimmy. But I don't think Billy, listening to his dialogue in the last year or so, I don't think he wants to coach in the NRL. Certainly not yet. So he's busy with the Maroons. I think he'll stay committed to Queensland.
Yeah, the thing against him probably is the fact that it's going to require immediate attention. You don't get to plan this. Is there a possibility that the Broncos go to a different current head coach, somebody already in a job? This is the biggest job available in the NRL. It's such a huge club. Is there a chance the Broncos maybe try and go and buy someone out of a current job?
Yeah, look, it's a great point. I mean, look, Jimmy, I've always been critical of the Broncos for this. To me, big clubs need big coaches. Man United had Sir Alex Ferguson. The Roosters have Trent Robinson. Wayne Bennett was at the Broncos for many years. I just don't believe, post Wayne Bennett, Brisbane have had Ivan Henjak, a rookie coach, Anthony Griffin, a rookie coach. I mean, what you can't take chances with the Broncos on rookie coaches, and that's where I think Michael Maguire, for me, Jimmy, seems like a natural option. I mean, he's one of the most experienced coaches in the game. He's won a premiership at South. He's got great gravitas. He went for the job in 2018 and missed out to Anthony Seibold, who was another rookie appointment. Really, he had one season at South when he got the Bronx job in 2019. So for me, Jimmy, I don't know who you headhunt of the current coaches. I mean, I'd go for Craig Bellamy. I'd offer him the farm. I'd offer him 10 years, pay him $5 million a year, whatever he wants. But I don't know if he'll ever leave the Storm. I think Matt Tripp won't ever let that happen.
Yeah, well, Pete, no doubt this story is going to keep on developing. We'll let you go. We really do appreciate you joining us here on the Buy Round, and good luck with the rest of the couple of days coming up. No doubt you'll be busy writing away and trying to get to the bottom of all this. Yeah,
no worries, Jimmy. Thanks, mate. Anytime.
Charlie, that was great to have Pete Badel join us. We're still digesting this news. I think we've called it the biggest story of the year in rugby league. Like, I still can't believe it's happened.
I'm flabbergasted, Jimmy. When I was it got shared in a group chat last night, and I honestly thought it was one of those prank tweets. I could not believe that Kevin Walters had been sacked. It seemed like the last thing that was going to happen. At the end of the year, they made it seem like his job was safe. And then all of a sudden, Walters is gone, and it looks like Madge is in.
Yeah, that's where all roads sort of look like they're leading to. Just in terms of this, like, yeah, I honestly, well, where has it come from? It's come from this end of season review. The talk about the Broncos towards the back end of the season, they were the hot button topic. What they've got to do for next season, how long, like, basically it was how long is the runway for Kevin Walters. People were 12 games, that was the magical number, and that was being spoken about, or the focus on the first 4 weeks, and we'll see what happens from there. I mean, looking at it from the club's point of view, it's a reaction because they feel nothing can happen next year, and under Kevin Walters, they weren't going to go anywhere, and maybe they were looking at that as it would be a stay of execution. I mean, do you congratulate the club for making such a big call, and not doing what Parramatta did this year, where I guess Brad Arthur was on that stay of execution, but yeah, it's still difficult to believe this has actually happened.
I just want to ask you about the review side of it, because obviously this is where the decisions come from. And you spoke about it with Badel, about how a few key voices would have contributed to this decision. How do these reviews actually work, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so Charlie, I've been a part of these end of season reviews before, obviously only in from a playing perspective, and at different time. Well, one was an external facilitator. So I remember Gus Gould come in to do the Dragons end of season review from 2019. From memory, we didn't have the greatest of seasons after a great 2018. Not too dissimilar to the Broncos. Great 2018, really poor 2019. So in comes this independent review, which was Gus Gould. Spoke to a number of the senior players about issues that had occurred within the year, small little fixes. I can't recall directly being asked, is Mary McGregor the man for the job? But if he was, I certainly would have supported him at the time. And then, I think that basically the recommendations were filtered to McGregor, to the other football staff members, but I don't recall anyone being moved on from that review. And then there was a time at the Bulldogs where I can recall the end of season review being conducted by the chairman and CEO at the time, and it was basically put bluntly to the senior players that is Des Hazard the man to take you forward? And we unanimously looked at each other and said yes. So that was put on us as senior players to sort of make that call. I didn't feel comfortable to be truthful. I don't think that's a call that a player should make. I think that should be an administrator's call. Like, in an ideal world, players play, coaches coach, administrators administrate. But obviously, you do need to get feedback. But basically, what has happened here, I believe, is that the senior players, so any number of Carrigans, Haas, Walsh, Reynolds, Mam, maybe throw Jordan Ricky in the mix. They're the big name players, the Stags, Cobbo, and they've ultimately sealed Kevy's fate. And it would have to be the overwhelming majority of those players that would have said we need to go in a different direction coaching wise.
Do you think that the number one voice in that team is Adam Reynolds? I think it's naive probably for us to sit here and say he hasn't been involved in this as one of those voices, because a lot of those guys you spoke about then are more inexperienced players. I don't think you're going to sack a coach if Reece Walsh has something to say about Kevin Walters. I don't think you're going to sack a coach if Ezra Mam has something to say about the coach. Really, it's Adam Reynolds and Patrick Carrigan are the two leaders of that club. And they have to have been involved in this somewhere along the way.
Mate, no doubt their voice would carry the most weight. So you've got to assume that they would have been, they would have been scathing in the review of Kevin and felt like things had to change, and that next year would have been a write-off. And you think of Adam Reynolds and his age; he knows time is ticking and time's running out. But for a coach coming in now at such late notice, it's going to be it's a difficult job, because it isn't just the coaching. Pete Badel there spoke about the culture of this superstardom that the Broncos have, and so many people just wanting to be a part of this club. That, for me, that's not pure coaching. That's at a different level. So if those are the cultural issues, I don't know if a head coach can change that aspect of the Broncos, which it appears to be a big issue. But in terms of X's and O's, that's where the Reynolds, the Carrigans of that organisation would have influence. So yeah, it certainly looks as if those two in particular have had a big say in this.
Adam Reynolds, he was coached by Michael Maguire. They won a premiership together at the South Sydney Rabbitohs. I have spoken to someone in the game of rugby league who believes that Michael Maguire is already talking to people involved in the Broncos, and there is an understanding that he's going to be the guy that takes over. That could be incorrect. You don't know. It's still very early days, but obviously Adam Reynolds and Michael Maguire, if this is true, would be speaking. And you just wonder if Michael Maguire was sounded out before the review, or Michael Maguire has been speaking to people at the Broncos before the review. And, it's just the timing of it, the pace that it's gone at. It just feels like they've got someone lined up already to have made the decision so quickly. Don't you think?
No. I think that, maybe this decision is... I think it's come off the back of this review, which was only conducted a couple of weeks ago. So, maybe last week it was completed. Then you've got to actually go through, that recommendation from the external reviewer is to move. That is the best course of action. So, Maguire coming in, he does appear to be the front runner. Speaking to Badel there, that they need an experienced coach. Like, when you look at, what does this group need? It needs some experience. But for me, the biggest issues is for the Broncos, it isn't talent. That's for sure. It appears as though this off-field groundswell of love, support, superstardom is difficult for them to get over. So Maguire coming in, who we know is big on discipline, we know is big on keeping players out of the media. He's had a proven track record of being a big disciplinarian and someone that demands a lot from his players. It would appear that he would be the front runner, because the other inexperienced coaches, if they were to come in now on the 29th of September, they'll be starting pre-season in November the 1st. So, or some of those players will be, and pre-seasons need plans. So for an inexperienced coach to have their first job with only 5 weeks preparation, I think you would almost be behind the eight ball before the season starts. Where Maguire, who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt when it comes to the pre-seasons, the grueling pre-seasons that South Sydney speak about, then I think it does point to that, doesn't it? But again, with Maguire, obviously the relationship with people in the media, especially up in Queensland, is fractured at best.
Well, we know what happened with Seabolt, with the old boys, and they can be ruthless. It is a brutal, brutal place to coach, especially if things are going bad. The media, we think in Sydney the media pressure is high on coaches. It's a completely different beast. If someone gets injured at your club, you could probably get away with it. Whereas at Broncos, there's 4 camera crews, 8 journalists, and it's straight away out there. You can't hide anything at that club. And the pressure's going to be massive. And Michael Maguire is probably not going to be, think about Gordon Tallis. Him and Michael Maguire have butted heads throughout this Origin series. And then you bring Michael Maguire in, and Gordon Tallis is arguably the biggest voice in media now. Yeah. And there's going to be so much pressure on him, on Madge. And if things don't go well, it's going to be horrific for him.
Yeah, you're right. And playing that media game, whether we like it or we don't, it is an important part of coaching in the game of rugby league, especially when you're at a big club like the Broncos. Maybe at clubs like the Storm, you can kind of get away with it because they are a little bit off the radar, despite being such a big club. With the Broncos, you need those healthy relationships with the media. But this is, I guess, obviously that what Maguire has done when it comes to New South Wales. He made a connection to the past and to those former players. Sorry. Yeah, so Maguire, he made that big connection with the former players around making sure they were part of the journey, honouring the past, but looking forward to the future. A lot of great football clubs do that. I know the Bulldogs have made a big effort to reconnect with their past and their former players. Myself, Josh Reynolds, Willie Mason, Mark O'Mealy, Hazem Al Masri, all the former players are in the building to help support to show to the current players that this is where we've come from. So that is a huge part of any big club, celebrating their past and having those former players on board to support the current crop, and obviously the current crop looking to the past and being respectful and admiring what they've done. So a multitude of issues for whoever comes in to take over the Broncos, but one of those issues is strengthening the relationships with the former players.
One last thing then before we wrap it up. It's hard for you to comment on if it's a good decision or not without knowing what was said in the review. But if it is Michael Maguire that takes over, is that an upgrade for the Brisbane Broncos, having Michael Maguire as your head coach over Kevy Walters?
I guess results will tell. Kevy, a 5-time premiership winner as a player, legend of the club. He couldn't get this. Well, he got the team to a grand final the year before, but obviously struggled this year. Say Maguire comes in, he's won a premiership before, but he's won that Origin series. He did a Queensland on Queensland, losing game 1, the spirit to come back and win those 2 games away from home. But then his tenure at the West Tigers was a disaster. So look, is it an upgrade? Time will tell, but the pressure now is on the players because they've been the catalyst for this. So, okay, this playing group has basically got Kevin Walters the sack, or they've made the recommendation that he needs to go and we need immediate change. So now that pressure comes onto the players, because if they don't perform, Maguire or whoever comes in will move them on. And also, the fans, the fans of the Brisbane Broncos, I read an article in the Telegraph, they were basically split 50-50 on whether Walters should stay whether this was the correct or incorrect decision. So the fans were pretty split, but one thing they will be united on now is that this becomes an issue for the playing group. You've made this decision, you now need to respond.
The game of rugby league, Jimmy. It is a beautiful game that never sleeps.
Oh, man,
and we get headlines galore.
Oh, mate, well, we were there thinking it's been a quiet week, and we're all the talk of Ponga, and then the Roosters enforcers, the last game for Jared. Like, we were, there wasn't that much to talk about, and then bang, wow, it's a story that's going to be dominating the headlines for the next couple of days. And like we've spoken about Maguire there, Charlie, but I think that the Broncos, because of the size of the club, will be looking at any option and bringing people, like paying people out of contracts. I think of Webster at the Warriors is another one that springs to mind in terms of, why wouldn't you look at somebody like him? He's been at the Penrith system before. Why wouldn't you even look at a guy like Cam Serraldo and try and buy him out of the Bulldogs? Like, he'd arguably be coach of the year. Like, I don't want him to do that, but if you're the Broncos and if you're such a big club, I know the Bulldogs are as well, but I'd be looking, well, what's it going to cost? Badel said throw the farm at someone like Billy Slater to try and get him out of a job, to remove him from his media commitments and his state of origin and Queensland role. Like, that's not beyond the realms of possibility. So all roads do look like they're leading to Michael Maguire, but the Broncos, because of the enormous club that they are, they'll be looking at any potential options that can improve this football team.
Absolutely. How good the prelims are here as well. Off to Melbourne now, Jimmy.
All right, well, travel safe, Charlie. Enjoy that AFL Grand Final tomorrow. I'm gutted that I'm not going to be there, but I did make a call to hang with the family, so enjoy Melbourne. Have a drink.
Will do, mate. Mate, Storm Roosters tonight. That's all that matters. Bring it on.